Today I want to talk about the comic book that saved Marvel Comics and laid the foundation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it's not the Avengers, but the Fantastic Four. In 1961, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby came together to change the course of comic book history. Trying to save a near-bankrupt publishing company, they created a new type of superhero. But not only a new type of superhero, a whole new universe of superheroes and a new way of telling superhero stories. This was the Marvel Revolution of the 1960s. But what was the Marvel Revolution? What made it so revolutionary? And what problems did it cause? The comic book industry experienced a boom in the 1930s and 1940s. But in the 1950s, the rise of television and of comic book censorship basically broke the medium. And by the 1950s, Marvel Comics was all but bankrupt. Marvel Comics had only one employee left, Stan Lee. It was publishing 8 titles as opposed to the earlier 60, and it was only printing old material. When Jack Kirby came to the offices in 1958, people were moving out the furniture because the company was closing. Jack Kirby decided to turn the place around, and he told Stan Lee, "Tell your boss to have these people stop moving out the furniture. I will make sure that these comic books will start making money again." At first, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby raised sales by making good but forgettable monster or western comics. But in 1961, they refocused their attention to superhero comics and created the Fantastic Four. At first view, the Fantastic Four seem like rather classic, traditional superheroes. The story is this: Reed Richards challenges his girlfriend's brother, and his own best friend to fly in a rocket ship. The rocket ship is hit by radiation, they crash, gain superpowers. All of this is not very new, but Stan Lee and Jack Kirby turned the Fantastic Four into revolutionary new superheroes because they added 2 twists to their story. First of all, their superpowers are based on trauma. Take the Thing. From a handsome, good-looking man, he is literally turned into a man of stone. And even though his superpowers allow him to save the universe, when he returns home, people still see him as a monster. For the Thing, being a superhero is nothing less than a curse. But also, his friend Reed Richards is guilt-ridden over causing the deformation of his friend. And this trauma subsequently drives their actions. These Fantastic Four are not carefree demigods such as Superman, but normal people with superpowers who struggle with their powers and with each other. The second thing that made the Fantastic Four different is that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby would focus on the relationships, characters, and everyday problems of these superheroes. The Fantastic Four not only had to confront Dr. Doom, but also each other and their own problems. A typical Fantastic Four comic book would for half be situated in an exotic location, where they would slug it out with supervillains, and the other half would be situated in the Fantastic Four building, in the kitchen or in the living room, where they would talk to each other, care for each other, and mend their own relationships. The tragedy that forms the basis of these superpowers and the basic humanity of these characters became the hallmarks of the Marvel Revolution, which took place in the early 1960s and of which Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were the masters. Take, for an example, the Hulk, which they also co-created. The Hulk becomes the Hulk because Bruce Banner tries to save his friend from, again, radiation poisoning, but then gets blasted himself. Or take the X-Men, who have amazing superpowers and try to use those powers to save the world, even though the world hates and fears them. But it's not only the superheroes that were different, they also moved in a different world. Before the Marvel Revolution, a typical monthly comic book would be an isolated story with no connection to the previous or the next story. and no connection to other comic book series. But Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created a world in which all these comic books are connected to tell one big encompassing saga. So, the Fantastic Four would cross over to the Hulk, who would then later meet Spider-Man, who would then later clash, which would then later be discussed by the Avengers. But the Marvel Revolution also created problems. When the Fantastic Four became a hit series, this created a demand for ever new comics and ever new characters. And in the span of 4 years, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby and others created almost the whole of the Marvel universe. Starting with the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, the Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, the Avengers, Daredevil, all of them were created between 1961 and 1964. This, however, is where Marvel history becomes messy. In order to keep up the pace and crank out ever more comic books, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby and others created the so-called Marvel method of making comic books. Stan Lee would dictate the outline of a story, often in a conversation or in a phone call, after which an artist would draw the entire comic book, and Stan Lee would return to the finished pages to add the dialogues. And although the Marvel method came with great advantages, it enabled enormous output, it gave great artistic freedom to the artists, it allowed Stan Lee to edit, plot and oversee various related comic book titles, it also came with great problems. After an initial burst of creativity, conflicts arose over credits, copyrights and remuneration. And by 1970, Jack Kirby was so frustrated over these issues that he even left Marvel, getting none of the copyrights to any of the characters that he had helped to co-create. Steve Ditko, the co-creator of Spider-Man, also left Marvel. Stan Lee has often been criticized for stealing the show and claiming all the credits, but he later too got into conflicts with Marvel Comics over issues of credits and copyrights. The conflict between Stan Lee and Jack Kirby counts as one of the most controversial in comic book history. In his better moments, Stan Lee admitted that all these characters were co-creations. But in his worst moments, he assigned himself a central role. Jack Kirby did the same. In reality, however, they shared a kind of kinetic energy that they could not reproduce on their own. For an example, the self-written Captain America stories by Jack Kirby are just plain goofy. And on his own, Stan Lee created forgettable characters such as Stripperella, who solves crimes by basically taking off her clothes. When, however, they teamed up again in 1978 to create this Silver Surfer graphic novel, it showed just how well they could work together. The second problem has to do with the saga-esque nature of Marvel Comics. At first, this can draw readers in, giving them the sense that there's something grand happening. But imagine that you have to plow through this Fantastic Four omnibus, all these issues and pages, before you can actually read a new Fantastic Four comic book and know what is actually going on. Recently, this has caused an interesting development. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has created a network of interconnected movies and TV series, very much in the spirit of the Marvel Revolution. At the same time, Marvel Comics moves on. Writers shed the burden of continuity and start telling smaller, more isolated stories, causing better comics and newer stories. The Marvel Revolution has moved on to the silver screen. Marvel Comics are now closing the circle and moving in a different direction. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, subscribe and ring the bell. And especially ringing the bell is important, because with all these bells I will exchange them for photon torpedoes, which I will then use to conquer the entire galaxy.